1, 0, all engine running. Liftoff, we have a liftoff, 32 miles per hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
On July the 20th, 1969, the world watched in wonder as astronaut Neil Armstrong first stepped onto the surface of the moon. His profound words echoed across the globe. Apollo 11 had achieved the unthinkable. It had put man on the moon.
Okay, Ed, we can see you coming down the ladder now.
Subsequent manned Apollo missions followed until Apollo 17's final manned mission to the moon in December 1972. But these Apollo programs are full of anomalies. Did NASA lie and fake these missions? And if so, why? To gain more clarity to these questions, we invited renowned researcher and author Andrew Johnson into the Unite Planet kitchen, and we delved deeper into NASA's Apollo missions and its protective layers of truth.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Okay, Andrew, welcome to Unite Planet Kitchen again, once more. Absolutely. And glad to see you here. And also, we're going to talk about the moon landings, or the fake moon landings, maybe. So I'd like to moon landings, yeah. So over to you. And
well, thanks very much for inviting me back. It's good to be back in the kitchen of revelation.
Oh yes.
As it were. Yeah.
Subtitle.
Yeah.
Kitchen.
So yeah. This is something that I started looking at, the Apollo, missions, and why, well, how and why they were faked, really. I think it was around about 2005 that I really sort of decided that yes, they had faked the majority of, the moon side of the missions at least, It was quite sad for me personally, because I am of the age of, I was born in '64, so
just about remember this.
Yeah, and I have a vague memory of being sat on the end of our settee watching the landing,
Okay.
And we had a black and white television then. Obviously, most people didn't have colour in '69 in the UK. A few did. And then I watched some of the later missions, and also, for example, my youngest brother, who's 7 years older than me, he had one of these Airfix Saturn V rockets, which was it was an amazing model, really. I think you probably still get them, probably worth a bit of money now. And the actual Airfix model was must have been about 3 foot tall. It was a big thing, And I remember him building that. Maybe it wasn't 3 foot tall, but it seemed big to me when I was a kid, And then another thing my brother did, which just reminded me of it, he came home from school one day and he'd been in his metalwork class, and he basically used a lathe in metalwork, and he'd made he made it what looked like a command module, which was just basically you get a cylinder of iron, and use the lathe on it, and then you can just make a cone for the booster at the back, and then shave off a bit at the front, and you've got something that looks like a command module, and I remember that knocking around the house for years and years. He might even still have it somewhere, So that was really the way I was looking at it, as a perfectly, nothing wrong with it, as we were told, official story was true, all of that. Up until really, I think around about 2004, when I got into all this disclosure project stuff, which I've described here before, and the other.
The conspiracy of it has been going for a while, hasn't it? Really?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, this is. I think it was Richard Hoagland that pointed out that NASA had made some comments about it being a hoax.
Yeah.
Years and years ago. And I forget the exact circumstances that Hoagland outlines, but. I think I'd probably heard of the idea of the hoax before I started looking at the disclosure project stuff, but I hadn't not really looked at it at all, and I just kept it on one side. I didn't dismiss it because I've always been open to things that don't seem likely at first glance, else I wouldn't be here right now, of course. That was all knocking about. And there's one other thing which happened actually, which I only remembered a few years after I started looking into the hoax, was because when I bought my first house, which was in 1988, and I wasn't married then, I was on my own, and I got some, I thought, well, let's get some pictures up in the lounge, and I actually got these big posters of the Apollo missions, I had 2 or 3 of them, and I had one of the famous shot of Armstrong, it's Aldrin, isn't it? The one with the, full length shot.
Oh, yes.
With him stood facing the camera.
Yeah.
And then you've got a black horizon in the background, and it's like full on, see all the spacesuit and everything. That's the iconic shot, really. I had that as a big poster on my kitchen, on my lounge wall.
Because you've always been into that space. I mean,
Correct.
last talk, the Simpson Solar System, as you said, you've always had an interest in space and moon landing.
Absolutely.
So it probably would have been quite a setback for you now.
It was, initially. But the thing that happened was when I moved house, because I moved in with my wife in 1997, and I'd moved all these posters I had, and I put them up on an upstairs room. I had a little room upstairs in the house because I was working from home by then, doing software development, and I'd got this poster on the wall, And then one day I just heard this crash, and it had literally fallen off the wall, and the glass had all smashed in it, just randomly. So I just chucked it away, and that was around about 97, 98, 99 before I got into all of this stuff. So it was a bit weird that it was almost like an omen of a future, sort of things that I was going to find out, kind of thing, Anyway, so I started looking at it, and I think one of the first things I came across was the Jim Collier investigation.
Right,
now, Jim Collier was a journalist. I think as far as I remember, he was a journalist, and he worked at either a national or a local US newspaper. So he was used to doing investigations, and I don't even know what kicked him off. But I remember watching a very sort of basic, sort of homespun VHS video that he made, 92, 93, 94, that sort of time frame, I think. 90s sometime, I think. And one of the things I remember from that, and I have still got this video somewhere on my website, it's called Was It Only a Paper Moon? You'll still find that.
Yeah.
And he's very unforgiving, just a very straight sort of down the line, here's the facts. And so people can watch that, which is the Only a Paper Moon video. And one of the things which I remember from that is that he went to the Smithsonian Institution, where they've got, I think allegedly it's the lunar module from Apollo 18, which never was launched.
Yeah. Okay.
So they had that lunar module there, and it's the same as all the other ones. They've got it in the museum, or I assume it's still there. And then what he did was he went up to this thing and he says, well, look, can I measure it? And he went to the curator, and the curator was a bit sort of nervous. They let him do it, and this, of course, was probably around about 1990, 92, sometime like that. And so he measured the hatch on the lunar module, how big it was, and he measured the space just inside the door and this sort of thing, Yes, and he took a tape measure, and I'm fairly sure he describes this in the video, Only a Paper Moon. And then he measured the size of the pack on the spacesuit that they had. He measured the dimensions of that, and he found that it was very, very difficult. It would have been really difficult to get out of that hatch successfully. And I think if I recall correctly, and it's a long time since I've watched this now, he pointed out that the pack on the back would probably break off some of the switches on one of the consoles as you were trying to get in and out, and it would have been really difficult. And that was an early sort of indication that I thought, maybe there's some things you can sort of check here, and that appears to be true. There's certain things that you can check, which really don't stack up, some physical things. And as of course, like when you get into a lot of this stuff, the more that you investigate, the more of these things that you find that seem to be, irrefutable, basically. So that was one of the early ones, that the space for the spacesuits wasn't really big enough. You could do it, but it wasn't really very realistic to expect them to do it without causing some damage to the suits or, the craft, which could have been very serious. If there's a switch you can't operate, and that is to do with powering up some of the electrics, which going to get you back home. That's fairly sort of serious.
And you think that if they would have known this as being the case and would have made it so none of this would have halted any switches or anything. It's a bit strange, isn't it?
It is.
I thought being NASA, you'd think they'd sort that out.
Yeah. And of course, this is that particular thing that I've mentioned doesn't often come up in the discussions. And the most common thing that comes up is the photographs and the shadows and things. That's what the skeptics like to say. Well, the shadows are actually okay, even though they might look incorrect. And in some cases, I think the skeptics are right, but in others, they're not.
Yeah.
So anyway, to try and sort of go in sort of linear fashion as I try to do. So I started investigating that in 2004, 5, and then I watched the Bart Sibrel films. I think that was after I'd watched the James Collier film, and the two Bart Sibrel films, which is on YouTube, are A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, which I think is about 55 minutes or something, and Astronauts Gone Wild. And those really, to me, are the two films which basically kill. They kill the moon hoax dead, really. I think, as it were. They expose enough to say, well, look, there is really something wrong here, to the point where, you can't. And I think it was watching The Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. There's one particular bit in that, which you may recall, where there's Armstrong, Aldrin and Collins allegedly half or three-quarters of the way to the moon. They're, I think, 180,000 miles away from the Earth, allegedly. And this is what's shown on the date on the film, which was on the canister. And what they're trying to do is film a shot of the Earth through the window. But what they've done is they've put the camera sort of as far away from the window as they can get it, and then they've blanked off the other lights so that it looks like the Earth is like, a long way from the camera, but actually it's pretty much filling the window. But it's just that they're using the spacecraft, blacked out as being the blackness of space, and they get away with it because, of course, with that sort of exposure where you're trying to expose the Earth, you don't see stars, because the stars then are too faint against the brilliance of the Earth. And Armstrong actually says, here we are, 108,000 miles out, there's the Earth, and there you go.
Michael Collins, Edwin Aldrin Jr. and Neil Armstrong staging part of their mission for nearly an hour in living colour, with exceptionally clear behind-the-scenes audio of conversations discussing the techniques used to achieve a disingenuous picture depicting the Earth at a distance, in order to falsely demonstrate their far journey from it and their ability to survive passing through the Van Allen radiation belts. It cannot be misconstrued that this staging was done for some other reason prior to the mission, for the reel itself is slated and dated July 18th, 19th and 20th, 1969, the very days of the mission when they were said to be approaching and achieving lunar orbit. Furthermore, it is apparent they are in genuine zero gravity aboard the actual spacecraft, necessary to convince the mass media of their authenticity, just not any further than Earth orbit, as you will see. In this never-before-seen or heard footage, not only is the radio conversation between the astronauts and Houston Control audible, there is a secondary, private conversation taking place between the crew and a third confidential party, prompting the astronauts with what to say, when to speak, and how to effectively manipulate the camera to achieve the desired misleading effect. NASA claims that the Houston transmissions were the only ones taking place with the astronauts. Listen now as Houston Control initiates a conversation with the crew, only to find them too preoccupied with the behind-the-scenes trickery to respond. Moments pass and the oversight is picked up on by the clandestine third party, who quickly prompts them with talk. Immediately, Neil Armstrong speaks.
Hello, Apollo 11. Houston, Goldstone says that the TV looks great. Over.
Okay, Roger, we're coming in on Earth.
Again, the illusion they are attempting to create is the Earth at a distance to demonstrate their far journey from it and their ability to survive passing through the Van Allen radiation belts. Understand, too, that only about 20 seconds of this raw footage was ever broadcast to the public, and these conversations discussing their deception were believed to be private, until now. Here they discuss that these television transmissions were in fact not broadcast live as everyone believed. They were first screened and edited for playback later.
Roger, Neil. We just wanted a narrative such that we can, when we get the playback, we can sort of correlate what we're seeing. Thank you very much.
Here they discuss the fact that they have turned out the lights and have blocked out sunlight from entering the spacecraft through the other windows, as to not cause any reflected light to fall onto the spacecraft's wall in the foreground.
Okay, very good. Well, we shut out the sun coming in some of the other windows into the spacecraft, so it's looking through the number one window, and there isn't any reflected light.
The reason this was done is so that the truth of the matter would not be revealed. It is this. Though the federal government would have you believe that this is a view of Earth from a distance out of the spacecraft's window as it nears the moon, it is not. What they have ingeniously done is placed the camera at the back of the spacecraft and centered the lens on a circular window in the foreground, outside of which it is completely filled with the Earth in low orbit. The circumference of the window then appears to be the diameter of the Earth at a distance, with the darkened walls of the spacecraft appearing to be the blackness of space around it. That is why they wanted the interior dark and blocked out the sun from entering through the other windows. Here you can see the extruded window, probably 2 inches thick at the bottom. This is because the Earth's shine is coming in at a downward angle. It also causes the Earth to appear to be an irregularly shaped circle, for you are seeing the outside of the window at the bottom and the inside of the window at the top, which together form 2 different sized halves of a circle. Subsequently, this take was never used. As they perfected the shot, a crescent-shaped piece of black material was inset slightly into the window to create the illusion of the Earth's terminator line dividing night and day. It is uncannily convincing. During this segment, intended to be edited and played back later for the worldwide television audience, dated July 18, 1969, Neil Armstrong condemns himself as he states that he is 130,000 miles out, or halfway to the moon, as the NASA flight log also states on this date, when he is in reality in low Earth orbit of a few hundred miles.
Roger, Houston, Apollo 11. Calling in from about 130,000 miles out.
Here, during another segment, also intended to air after review, Neil Armstrong falsely explains to the viewers how the shot is attained by putting the camera's lens to the window's glass, as it would have to be if they were the claimed distance away from the Earth.
We only have one window that has a view of the Earth, and it's filled up with a TV camera.
If the window was completely filled up with a TV camera, as he stated, then an astronaut's arm would not be able to get between the camera and the window, as it obviously does here in this outtake.
South America becomes invisible just off beyond the Terminator or inside the shadow.
You can also notice how the astronaut operating the camera reacted to the mistake by attempting to pan away from it.
Blue cast, see white bands of major cloud formations across the Earth. And you see
This is a segment that they believed wasn't even being recorded, much less suitable for broadcast, for the lens was being zoomed out and the scene was being changed to that of an interior of the astronauts at work, and apparently the stop button popped back up on the recorder without notice. Here is the diffused work light that they used to see camera controls, but not throw light onto the spacecraft's wall. Here they remove part of the crescent insert. Finally, the iris is opened up and you can see the real location of the camera and the very bright and near Earth out the window. Here is the slate for the 19th of July, and the same shot of trickery on the 19th of July, and then the 20th, and the same misleading shot on the 20th. Later that evening, they were said to be walking on the moon. How can this be when they were in Earth orbit only 9 hours earlier, and the moon is some 3 days' journey away? Furthermore, if they genuinely went to the moon, why would they be faking any part of it?
And you can see them sort of moving this piece of card because they need to change the curvature of the edge of the Earth to make it look realistic, because it's the wrong shape. Because it appears that they're in low Earth orbit. So this is an important factor to consider, in that we don't, when people talk about the Apollo hoax, we don't mean that the rockets didn't blast off and they didn't go into space necessarily. Although there is some talk that even the going into orbit may have been faked as well. I don't really know about that. I think they did go into low Earth orbit, and I think there's enough evidence from other missions to show that that had already been done. Gordon Cooper did the Mercury flights. I don't think he was faking it, particularly as Cooper was very vocal about the UFO issue. Later in his later years of his life, and he had some very interesting accounts to relate Gordon Cooper. And I don't think he doesn't have the ring of disinformation to him like Edgar Mitchell does, which I'll come to Edgar Mitchell later. Gordon Cooper, I think, was a genuine guy, and he was actually scheduled to go onto the Apollo program, Cooper, but he got bounced off it. He got told he wasn't going to do it, and I can't remember the reason, but that's you can look that up. So Cooper was meant to go onto the program, but didn't. That was sort of my starting point, was the Bart Sabrell films. I've actually communicated with Bart Sabrell a couple of times, and he's a good guy. A couple of years ago, they did an interview for a Channel 5 documentary of him, and they put about 10 minutes of him in this documentary, and they made him look really kooky. And he had the camera kind of like slightly below eye level, so the camera was looking up, and he had the bald head. Now he's shaved all his hair off, so the camera sort of slightly looking up, not quite up his nostrils, made him look a bit crazy.
It's tactic, isn't it?
It is. But fortunately, what he did was, and he published this on his YouTube channel not too long ago, maybe a couple of years ago. He actually recorded the whole thing with a camera up in the top of his room, and it was about an hour long. So he recorded the whole interview, of which the Channel 5 used about 10 minutes, and he stuck that on his YouTube channel. And so Bart Sabrell, he's been like a real bulldog going after the Apollo hoax, because he you know, a bit like myself, he had posters all over his walls. I think he's probably a couple of years older than me or something like that. I don't think he's that much older than me. So we're in that sort of same era.
Yeah.
And so he's his films, as I say, we definitely need to watch those.
Oh, yeah,
And then the other films, we'll get these out of the way initially before we talk about some of what's in some of these films. The other film that was made much more recently was a film called Moon Hoax Now by Jet Windsor.
Oh yeah.
I think that's a pseudonym.
Yeah.
I think that's a pseudonym, Jet Windsor. I don't think that's his real name. And that's also a very good 1 hour documentary. So people can watch that on YouTube as well. And I think if you watch, and then the other one, of course, that you can watch is the David Percy films, which is called What Happened on the Moon. And they were made, I think, in 1999, so almost 20 years old now. And David Percy is also a very prominent figure in the moon hoax research community. And I really like David Percy because he just keeps himself to himself. And he doesn't really snark at anybody else. His stuff is out there. The videos are on his website for free. He's regularly published new articles. He's been doing that for 20 years. And that's allis.com. www.aulis.com. Get onto that site if you're interested. Some great articles on there.
It's just about the Mars as well.
Because he came up in the Mars research as well. He's done stuff on that. And again, he's stuck to his guns on that. He's done his own thing. He's got some good stuff on the Mars anomalies as well, the phase particularly inside Onion. That's all on Aulis as well. So I highly recommend that site. And a lot of the good information really that I have put into my talks came from him really, Mary Bennett, his fellow researcher. So those are very good resources, and I think if you watch those films, the David Percy one's 3 hours, Jet Windsor, that's about an hour, Jim Collier's about an hour, Bart Sabell's a couple of hours. You've got about sort of 6 hours viewing there, 7 hours viewing, and that should sort you really. Once you've seen that.
I've seen Apollo Zero. Is that
correct? Yeah, that's another good one. And that was made by Gerard White.
Oh, all right.
And a couple of other buddies, I think, Gerard White. So I should mention him as well. He became. His videos are worth watching. He's done he must have done 100 hours of videos on the Apollo stuff. And so his videos are a little bit harder to digest than perhaps David Percy's and so forth. Still very good. They tend to focus more on some of the minutiae of certain things like the geology of rocks and things like that. And another good one that Gerard White looks at is the story of the flag. The flag on the moon. Well, it's not so much that.
No. Okay.
Because that's the other one that people say, oh, the flag blew. How could the flag blow? Because there's no air. Well, does it really blow? Or again, if their story is true on that, and it's on a spring-loaded sort of rod, if the spring is popping out, and when they're setting it up, that can make the flag flap, apparently in the wind. Okay. But the one that Gerard White talks about is a bit different because he talks about a story of a Soviet cosmonaut on the Mir space station. And what they'd done is they'd been out on a spacewalk one time. I think this was the Mir space station, would have been in the 90s probably. And they'd put out a Soviet flag, a Russian flag, and they'd hung it across some structure on the Mir space station. And this had been out there for I think 18 months, a couple of years, because Mir space station was up there for quite a while. And then one of the cosmonauts said, "Oh, let's get that flag back in." This was about 18 months later on the next spacewalk, just to see what it looks like. And the other guy looked out and said, "Oh, you needn't bother because there's nothing left of it, because it had all basically been damaged by radiation and micrometeoroid impacts." And this is when it's in Earth orbit. And this was after about 18 months, 2 years. So NASA are claiming that there was another story from NASA that they could see the flag from the Apollo missions with Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter after nearly 40 years. So this is another problem for NASA, that they would claim this. but maybe we'll come on to some of that in a bit. Because there is a lot of evidence, again, it's like I say, it's like drinking from a fire hose once you get started.
Mm-hmm.
But what I do, I put this all together into a presentation called Apollo Removing Truth's Protective Layers. Why did I call it Removing Truth's Protective Layers? Well, maybe you can include the clip of Neil Armstrong.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah.
Today we have with us a group of students among America's best. To you we say, we have only completed a beginning. We leave you much that is undone. There are great ideas undiscovered, breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of truth's protective layers. Can remove one of truth's protective layers.
That was another thing that I saw, which was really
Quite intriguing.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, it was on
Yeah.
that was in Bart Sibrel's film.
Yeah.
And it was Neil Armstrong, and he made this speech in 1994, which was the 25th anniversary of the alleged moon landings, in the White House. He was in front of President Clinton, and probably Hillary as well, and he said, he basically said, what we completed was only a beginning. We leave you much that is undone. There are great ideas undiscovered and breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of the truth's protective layers. And he says there are places to go beyond belief. And you're thinking, but Neil, you went to the moon. What are you going to tell us about that? Why was what you completed only a beginning? You went there. Nobody's done that. Nobody's done that since, which of course is nothing we'll come on to. Nobody has come close to what Apollo did. And it's nearly 50 years now. Next year it'll be 50 years. All right? Nobody's come close to what Apollo did. Again, we'll talk maybe a bit more about that. So what is Neil Armstrong trying to tell us? And again, I think if you watch the body language of what he's saying, and look at him, because when he's saying this, he's not looking at the audience. He's looking around behind him, as if he's saying something to the people. He's sending them a message. So what exactly is Neil Armstrong saying? And I think he's saying, in a word my interpretation is, we didn't go. This was all. The truth is we didn't go. There was something else going on which I can't tell you about. So I tell you about it. There'll be serious ramifications for me and my family. And I think the timing of why he said that and when, and I could be totally wrong, but I say this in the presentation, Apollo Removing Truth's Protective Layers, is that he was under a lot of stress at that time. He was really struggling with the, having to keep this secret for 25 years. And his marriage of 38 years broke up in the same year.
Okay.
So I think he was going through a bad time. And as people may be familiar, Armstrong didn't really give that many interviews. It's not true to say he didn't give any interviews. He did give a few. But I think if you do look for them, I think when I was researching this, I found about 4 or 5 interviews on the internet.
Patrick Moore, I think, not long after that.
Correct. I mentioned that, yeah.
70, something like that.
1970, correct. It was a few months after. That's one of the few, and that's only 7 minutes. 7 minutes long from the first man to walk on the moon.
Do you think, from your knowledge of the moon, having been there, that it is going to be possible in the foreseeable future to set up scientific bases there on anything like a large scale?
Oh, I'm quite certain that we'll have such bases in our lifetime. Somewhat like the Antarctic stations and similar scientific outposts, continually manned.
There's another one that they did in 2005. There was a profile done of him by Ed Bradley, I think, for one of the US news networks. I think was it for 60 Minutes, it was CBS, or anyway, you can find it online, I'm fairly sure. And that's very interesting because in that interview with Ed Bradley, he describes Apollo as one piece of fireworks. That's what he says. And because Ed Bradley says something like, how would you like to be remembered, after you're gone? And he said, well, I'd rather be remembered for the ledger of my daily work than for one piece of fireworks.
Wow.
That's what he says in that interview.
You said once to a reporter, how long must it take before I cease to be known as a spaceman? Why did you make that comment?
I guess we all like to be recognized not for one piece of fireworks, but for the ledger of our daily work.
So what did he say? I mean, going back to the 1994 thing, the other thing that I forgot to mention, and there's sort of two things that come together here, is that Armstrong said, he introduced his talk by saying, a parrot can talk, but a parrot is the only bird that can talk but doesn't fly very well. And I thought, that's a really peculiar thing to say.
Ladies and gentlemen, Wilbur Wright once noted that the only bird that could talk was the parrot, and he didn't fly very well.
That's really what doesn't fly very well. Well, why would you be talking about not flying very well when you're talking about flying to the moon? Surely if you're flying to the moon, you're flying pretty well.
Yeah.
And I, again, maybe my brain is, jumping to the wrong conclusion, but when I heard that, and I heard that later on, I heard the Truth Protected Layers bit first, but I didn't realise there was a complete 10-minute speech. The Truth Protected Layers is literally like 20 seconds long, whatever it is. The whole speech that Armstrong gave was about 7 minutes, and it was only a few years later that I came across the whole speech with that parrot bit in it, right? But by that time I found out what happened with Apollo 1, because the first Apollo mission that was getting going was with Ed White, Ed Chafee and Gus Grissom.